There is a moment, you may have already lived it, when a gentle person stops apologizing for existing. It lasts perhaps 3 seconds. No one claps. No one notices. But in that moment, somewhere in a house, in an office, in a marriage, a small god dies. And the person who killed it was not cruel. She was kind for years, past the point of reason. And then, one ordinary Tuesday, she simply stopped. That is where our story begins tonight. Not with rage, with silence. The most dangerous silence in the world. Good evening. I want to talk to you about a danger that almost no one sees coming, because it wears the wrong face. We have spent 100 years being warned about the narcissist, the loud one, the charming one, the one who walks into a room and rearranges the furniture of your self-esteem without asking. We know his type. We have books about him, podcasts about him, support groups for his exhausted survivors. He has become, in our age, the great villain of the modern psyche, and he deserves the scrutiny. But I want to speak of someone else tonight, someone far more dangerous and far less understood. I want to speak of the empath, the feeler, the healer, the one who carries the emotional weather of every room she enters, after she has finally had enough. Because here is a truth that took me a lifetime of sitting with suffering people to understand. The narcissist is not actually the most powerful figure in that relationship. He only appears to be. His power is borrowed. It is borrowed entirely from the empath's willingness to supply it. He is, psychologically speaking, an empty vessel wearing the armor of a god. And the armor is made of her attention, her forgiveness, her endless, generous, self-erasing love. Take that away, and what is left of him is a frightened child standing in an empty room, holding a scepter that no longer means anything, screaming into a silence that no longer answers. That is what happens when the empath stops. And that, tonight, is what I want you to understand. Not as information, but as a kind of awakening. Because some of you in this room are the empath. Some of you have been pouring yourselves into a cup that was never going to fill, for someone who was never going to say thank you. And some of you are approaching, right now, this very month, this very week, the edge of your own becoming fed up. I'm here to tell you, do not fear that edge. Do not apologize for reaching it. It is not a breakdown. It is a birth. Let us begin at the beginning, because nothing about the soul can be understood by starting in the middle. Every one of us wears a mask into the world. I do not say this to shame you. I say it because it is simply the architecture of being human in society. We cannot walk into every room showing our whole unedited interior. We would frighten the neighbors and ourselves. So we construct a face for the world to see. A pleasant face. A capable face. A face that says, I am fine. I am helpful. I am easy to love. This mask has a very old and very useful function. It lets us move through civilization without catching fire. But there is a danger in the mask, and it is this. If you wear it long enough, you begin to believe it is your whole face. You begin to mistake the performance for the person. And nowhere is this danger more acute than in the life of the empath. Because the empath's mask is not vanity, it is virtue. Her mask says, I feel everything. I forgive everything. I give until it hurts, and then I give a little more, because that is what a good person does. And who could ever object to a mask made of kindness? Who would ever tell her to take it off? Certainly not the narcissist. He recognized that mask the instant he saw it, the way a moth recognizes a particular kind of light. He did not choose her by accident. Something in him, some old, hungry, unconscious part, smelled the emotional feast in her, the way an animal smells water in a desert. He did not create her wound. He merely found it. And he has been drinking from it ever since. This is the part that people misunderstand about narcissism. And I want to be precise about it. Because precision here will save you years of confusion. The narcissist is not strong. He is starving. Beneath that glittering, entitled surface is a hollowness so old and so unbearable that he cannot look at it directly. Not even for a moment. not even alone in the dark. So he built, very early in his life, a magnificent structure of self-importance to stand between himself and that hollowness. It is not confidence. It is scaffolding around a collapse. And scaffolding, as any builder will tell you, requires constant material. It requires supply. It requires someone, somewhere, to keep feeding the structure so it does not fall in on the empty room beneath it. Enter the empath, the perfect supplier. Not because she is foolish, hear me on this, but because she is deep. Her capacity to feel the pain of others is not a weakness in her design. It is one of the most remarkable instruments the human soul possesses. She can sense a shift in someone's mood before a single word is spoken. She can hold the grief of a stranger as though it were her own. This is not smallness. This is a kind of genius. But like every great instrument, it can be played by the wrong hand. And the narcissist is nothing if not a virtuoso at finding the wrong hand to play. So he plays her. Gently, at first. A wound revealed here, a vulnerability confessed there, just enough to activate her extraordinary gift for compassion. And she responds exactly as her nature designed her to respond, with warmth, with patience, with the unshakable belief that if she simply loves well enough and understands deeply enough and forgives generously enough, the wound in him will finally close. This is her tragic flaw, if we must call it that, though I would rather call it her sacred error. She believes that love, applied with sufficient devotion, can heal a hunger that was never actually about her at all. Years pass this way, sometimes decades. She grows quieter. She grows smaller in rooms she used to fill. She begins to wonder, on nights when she cannot sleep, whether she is the problem, whether her feelings are too much, her needs too inconvenient, her expectations unreasonable. This, I must tell you, is not an accident. It is the precise and terrible genius of this dynamic. The narcissist does not need to destroy her confidence through cruelty alone. He simply needs to consume her attention so completely, for so long, that she forgets she is allowed to have any left over for herself. And here is where the ordinary story usually ends. The empath breaks down. She becomes depleted, depressed, a shadow of the luminous creature she once was. The books call this burnout. The therapists call it compassion fatigue, and it is real, and it is tragic, and I do not wish to minimize the suffering in it for even one sentence. But I am not here tonight to tell that story. I am here to tell you what happens next, when the story does not end in collapse, when something else happens instead, when, instead of finally breaking, she finally wakes. Let me describe this moment to you as precisely as I can, because I believe some of you are standing at its threshold this very night. It rarely arrives with thunder. That is the first thing to understand. We imagine transformation as a dramatic scene, a slammed door, a screamed sentence, a suitcase thrown down a staircase. Sometimes it does look like that, but far more often it arrives as something almost embarrassingly small. A comment that on any other day she would have absorbed without a flinch, but on this day, for reasons she cannot fully explain even to herself, does not land the way it used to. It lands, instead, on something that has quietly, invisibly hardened beneath the softness. And she notices the hardness. And in noticing it, she becomes, for the first time in a very long time, curious about herself rather than worried about him. This is the birth of what I want to call, and I choose this phrase with great care, the fed-up empath. Do not mistake fed up for bitter. Bitterness is a wound that has curdled. It still orbits the one who caused it, still organizes itself entirely around him, still seeks, in some disguised form, his acknowledgement or his suffering. Fed up is different. Fed up is not corroded feeling. It is completed feeling. It is a debt that has finally, fully been paid, so that nothing further is owed. The fed-up empath does not want revenge. She does not even, particularly, want an apology anymore. What she wants, what she has finally, quietly decided she is entitled to, is simply to stop. And this exact moment is the moment the narcissist never sees coming, because his entire model of her was built on the assumption that she never would. Consider what his psychology requires of her. He needs her attention like a plant needs light, not occasionally, but constantly, structurally, as the very condition of his continued growth. He has built his entire fragile architecture on the premise that she will always, eventually, come back. That she may storm off, she may cry, she may even leave for a week, but she will return, because that is who she is, because that is what her love has always looked like, because in the deepest chamber of his unconscious, he does not actually believe she has an existence independent of his need for her. So when she stops, not dramatically, not with a speech, but simply, quietly, permanently, something happens to him that is genuinely, clinically terrifying to witness. The scaffolding he built his entire identity upon begins, for the first time in his adult life, to buckle. And there is no more desperate, no more dangerous creature on this earth than a man who has just discovered that the floor he has been standing on his whole life was never floor at all. It was her. This is why I say to you tonight, the fed-up empath is more dangerous than the narcissist ever imagined. Not because she becomes cruel. She rarely does. She does not need to become cruel. She only needs to become absent. And her absence is a weapon he has no training against, because he was never given a manual for how to survive without an audience. His entire self was built to be witnessed, admired, forgiven, fed. Take away the witness, and you have not defeated a man. You have removed the only thing holding up a building that was hollow from the foundation. And buildings, when the scaffolding comes down, do not fall gracefully. I want you to sit with that image for a moment, because I think it is the heart of everything I am trying to say to you tonight. The empath was never the weak one in that story. She was always the load-bearing wall. And the moment she understands this, truly understands it, not as an idea in a book, but as a fact in her bones, the entire architecture of that relationship reveals itself for what it always was. Not a partnership between equals, but a structure built entirely upon her strength, disguised as his. Now, I want to be very careful here, because there is a temptation, when we tell this story, to simply crown the empath, the new hero and the narcissist, the permanent villain, and move on with our evening feeling satisfied. I will not let us do that, because it would betray everything that a genuine understanding of the soul requires of us. The truth is more difficult and more useful than that. The truth is this: the empath's exhaustion was never really about him at all. It only looked that way. What she was actually exhausted by. And this is the harder medicine, the medicine I most want you to swallow tonight, was the unlived, unclaimed, unexpressed portion of her own self. All those years she spent absorbing his moods, managing his fragility, translating his cruelty into some more forgivable language so she could keep loving him. All of that energy did not come from nowhere. It came from her own psyche, and it came at a cost. Every act of understanding him was an act of not attending to herself. Every ounce of compassion she extended toward his wound was an ounce withdrawn from the care of her own. This is the part that changes everything, if you can hear it. The narcissist did not steal her power. She gave it to him freely, generously, for reasons that made complete sense at the time. Because somewhere in her own history, long before she ever met him, she learned that her worth was measured by how much she could give away, how much pain she could absorb without complaint, how invisible she could make her own needs in service of someone else's comfort. He did not create that pattern in her. He simply recognized it, the way water recognizes the lowest point in a landscape, and flowed there without hesitation. So when I say the empath becomes dangerous once she is fed up, I do not mean dangerous to him alone. I mean dangerous to every false structure that has ever asked her to be smaller than she is. I mean dangerous to her own old belief that her worth is conditional on her usefulness to others. I mean dangerous, most of all, to the lie. The very old, very seductive lie that says a good person is a person with no boundaries. This is where the deep work begins, and I want to walk you through it, because it is not automatic. Fed up is a feeling. What we are after tonight is a transformation. And transformation requires more than a feeling. It requires a confrontation. There is a part of every one of us that we do not like to look at directly. I have spent my whole working life calling this the shadow, and I will not abandon that word tonight, because no other word does it justice. The shadow is not evil, though we fear it as though it were. The shadow is simply everything about ourselves that we have refused to acknowledge, refused to integrate, pushed down into the cellar of the psyche because it did not fit the mask we chose to wear upstairs. And here is the strange, almost comic truth about the shadow. Whatever we refuse to face in ourselves, we will meet in the outer world instead, dressed up as fate, dressed up as circumstance, dressed up, very often, as the people we find ourselves drawn to. The empath's shadow is not cruelty, though she fears that it might be. Her shadow is anger. Her shadow is the word no, unadorned, unexplained, unapologized for. Her shadow is the simple, terrifying sentence, my needs matter as much as yours do. For years she has kept this shadow locked in the cellar, because somewhere along the way she learned that a good woman, a good man, a good and loving soul does not have needs that inconvenience others. And so every time that shadow anger rose up in her, every time some quiet voice inside her said, this is unfair, this is too much, I am disappearing, she did what she had been trained to do. She smiled. She understood. She forgave. She sent the anger back down into the cellar and locked the door again. But here is the law of the psyche, and it is as reliable as gravity. What is repressed does not disappear. It accumulates. It waits. And eventually, inevitably, it finds its way to the surface, because the soul, unlike the mask, cannot lie to itself forever. This is what fed up actually is, if we look at it honestly. It is not a mood. It is the shadow finally breaking through the floorboards of the persona. It is years of unclaimed anger, unclaimed need, unclaimed self, arriving all at once in a single unremarkable moment, disguised as simply being done. And here is the crucial fork in the road, the place where one path leads to bitterness and the other leads to wholeness. If the empath merely acts out this shadow, if she lets the anger explode without understanding it, without integrating it, without asking what it has been trying to teach her all these silent years, she risks becoming exactly what she feared: cold, closed, punishing, a mirror image of the very coldness she once suffered under. This is not the transformation I am describing tonight. This is merely the shadow taking the wheel instead of the persona, and neither extreme is wholeness. The true transformation, the one that makes her genuinely, permanently dangerous to every force that ever diminished her, happens when she does something far braver than exploding or collapsing. She turns and faces the anger directly. She asks it what it has been protecting all these years. And almost always, beneath the anger, she finds something startlingly tender. A child who was taught, far too early, that love had to be earned through self-erasure. A young woman who believed that being needed was the only reliable substitute for being loved. A person who confused endurance with virtue and exhaustion with proof of devotion. When she meets that tenderness, when she stops fighting her own shadow and instead takes it by the hand, something remarkable happens. The anger does not disappear. It transforms. It becomes something far more stable, far more quiet, and far more formidable than rage ever was. It becomes conviction. And conviction, unlike anger, does not need an audience. It does not need him to understand. It does not need an apology to feel complete. It simply is. It stands in the room like a closed door, and it does not explain itself to anyone. This, finally, is what I mean when I say the fed-up empath is more dangerous than the narcissist ever imagined. She has stopped needing his validation to know her own worth. She has integrated the very anger she once feared, and in integrating it, she has become whole in a way she never was while she was busy being merely kind. Wholeness, you must understand, is not the same as goodness. Goodness is half a person, performing virtue while hiding its shadow in the basement. Wholeness is a person who has been down to that basement, turned on the light, and made peace with everything living there. And a whole person cannot be managed the way a half person can. This is the narcissist's nightmare, though he could never have named it, because he never developed the capacity for that kind of self-reflection. He built his entire strategy on the existence of her persona, the endlessly forgiving, endlessly available, endlessly self-doubting mask she wore for so many years. He has no strategy whatsoever for her shadow, integrated and calm and entirely unbothered by his opinion of her. He is, in the truest sense, facing an opponent he does not have the psychological equipment to even perceive. I want to pause here and speak directly to those of you in this room who recognize yourselves in what I have described. I do not say this to flatter you, and I do not say it to romanticize your suffering. I say it because it is true. Your capacity to feel deeply, to sense what others cannot say, to hold pain that is not your own. This was never your weakness. It was always your gift. The tragedy was never that you felt too much. The tragedy was that you were never taught where the boundary of that feeling should end and where your own life should begin. So let me offer you now, not comfort, but instruction. Because a speech that only makes you feel understood without also making you capable has failed at its true purpose. The first task, if you are standing at this threshold, is to stop mistaking exhaustion for evidence of love. This is perhaps the deepest lie the empath tells herself, and it must be named plainly. I am so tired, therefore I must truly love him. No, exhaustion is not proof of love. Exhaustion is proof of imbalance. Real love, mature love, does not require the annihilation of one party for the sustenance of the other. If you find yourself disappearing in the presence of someone else's need, that is not devotion. That is depletion wearing devotion's clothing. The second task is to learn, perhaps for the first time in your adult life, the discipline of the unanswered question. The narcissist will ask you, in 1,000 disguised forms, to explain yourself. Why are you upset? Why can't you just let this go? Why do you always make things difficult? And your old pattern, the pattern of the persona, was to answer, to justify, to translate your pain into language he could digest without discomfort. The new discipline, the discipline of the integrated shadow, is to let some questions simply hang in the air, unanswered, because you no longer owe an explanation for the fact of your own feelings. A boundary that must be justified is not yet a boundary. It is still a negotiation. The third task is the hardest, and it is this: you must grieve. Do not skip this. Do not rush past it toward triumph, because triumph without grief produces only a harder, more brittle version of the very persona you are trying to shed. You gave years, perhaps decades, to a hunger that was never going to be satisfied by your giving. That is a genuine loss, and it deserves genuine mourning, not because the relationship deserved your years, but because you deserve to honor the fact that you spent them, and that they are gone, and that grieving them is the only honest way through to the other side. A person who skips this grief does not become free. She becomes numb. And numbness is simply the persona wearing a new, colder mask. The fourth task is to reclaim, deliberately and without apology, the parts of yourself you set aside in order to be loved. Perhaps it was your ambition. Perhaps it was your opinions, your art, your friendships, your simple right to spend an evening exactly as you pleased without accounting for someone else's mood. Whatever it was, name it specifically. Not in the abstract, but in the particular. And begin, in small and concrete ways, to take it back. This is not selfishness. I want to say this as plainly as I possibly can. Reclaiming yourself after years of self-erasure is not selfishness. It is restoration. You are not becoming a different person. You are becoming, for the first time in a long time, the actual person who was always underneath the performance. And the fifth task, the final one, is perhaps the most difficult of all. You must resist the temptation to become the very thing you escaped. There is a real danger, once the fed-up empath discovers her own power, that she will begin to wield it the way it was once wielded against her, coldly, punitively, as a means of controlling others rather than simply protecting herself. This is the enemy's last trick, if I can put it that way, though there is no true enemy here but the unintegrated shadow itself, to convince you that strength means becoming untouchable, that healing means never being vulnerable again. This is false. The goal was never to stop feeling. The goal was never to become hard. The goal was to feel just as deeply as you always have, but from a center that is now stable enough to feel without being consumed. This is the true image of wholeness I want to leave with you tonight, and I want to describe it as vividly as I can, because I believe it is the image some of you have been waiting your whole lives to see given words. Picture her now, not as she was, small and appeasing and endlessly available, but as she becomes on the other side of this transformation. She still feels everything. If anything, she feels more, because she is no longer spending half her energy managing the fear of her own feelings. But she stands differently now. There is a stillness in her that was not there before. Not the stillness of suppression, but the stillness of a person who has met her own depths and is no longer afraid of them. She can sit across from cruelty now and feel it fully, without being destroyed by it, without needing to fix it, without believing for one instant that it is her responsibility to heal it. She has become, in the oldest and truest sense of the word, sovereign. Not because she conquered anyone, because she stopped needing anyone's permission to be whole. And this is precisely why she becomes, in that old dynamic, more dangerous than anything the narcissist ever imagined. He built his entire existence around a war he thought he understood, a war for control, for admiration, for supply. He trained his whole life for that war. But she is no longer fighting it. She has left the battlefield entirely, not in retreat, but in something far more devastating to him, indifference born of wholeness. There is no strategy for a war the other side has simply stopped attending. His weapons, the charm, the guilt, the subtle cruelty disguised as concern, all of them require her participation to function, and she is no longer participating. Not out of anger, out of completion. I want you to understand something important before we close tonight, because I do not want you to leave this room thinking this speech has been about villains and victims, about him and her, about winning and losing. It has not. It has been about something much older and much larger than any single relationship. It has been about the return of a soul to itself. Every one of us, in some fashion, has given away a portion of our own life in exchange for a love, an approval, a sense of belonging that we believed we could not survive without. Some of us gave it to a partner. Some of us gave it to a parent, a career, an image of ourselves we built to please a world that never actually demanded it. The particular shape of the narcissist and the empath is simply one especially vivid version of a pattern that lives, in smaller and larger forms, in nearly every human life. The pattern of paying for love with pieces of yourself, until there is nothing left to pay with, and you finally, mercifully, run out. Running out is not the tragedy. Running out is the beginning of the cure. Because it is only when we have nothing left to give away that we are finally forced to ask the only question that ever really mattered. What is actually here underneath all this giving? Who am I when I am not busy being useful to someone else's story? That question, my friends, is the beginning of every real transformation a human being has ever undergone. It is uncomfortable. It is, for a while, genuinely frightening, because it strips away the identity we built to survive and asks us to stand, for the first time, in something raw and truer. But on the other side of that discomfort is not emptiness, it is presence. It is a self, finally, that does not need anyone else's hunger to feel real. So if you are here tonight because you recognize yourself in the empath I have described, because you are tired in a way that sleep does not fix, because you have spent years translating your own pain into a language soft enough for someone else to bear, I want you to hear this final thing clearly, and I want you to carry it with you when you leave this room. You are not required to keep paying a debt that was never yours to begin with. You are not obligated to remain small so that someone else can remain comfortable. Your exhaustion is not evidence of your inadequate love. It is evidence of a love that was never met with an equal measure in return. And the moment you feel that quiet, unglamorous, undramatic feeling, the feeling of simply being done, do not apologize for it. Do not explain it away. Do not shrink back from it because it does not look like the forgiveness you were taught to offer. That feeling is not the end of your capacity to love. It is the beginning of your capacity to love yourself as fiercely as you have always loved everyone else. It is the shadow, finally, coming up from the cellar to stand beside you in the light. No longer something to fear, but something to thank. And when that shadow and that light finally stand together, whole, unashamed, answering to no one, that is the moment a person becomes truly, quietly, unshakably dangerous. Not to those who love them, only to those who were counting on them never becoming whole. Go, then, and be fed up, if fed up is what is true in you tonight. Grieve what needs grieving. Reclaim what needs reclaiming. And walk out of this room not as someone who has finally won a war against another person, but as someone who has finally stopped fighting a war against herself. That is the only victory that was ever worth having. And it was, all along, entirely within your reach. Thank you.